Welcome to the Working CEO podcast, where we share real advice for busy business leaders. No business school BS, no sugarcoating, just straight talk about how to get work done. After years as a global account executive for the country's largest phone company, Dave Dyson decided there must be a better way to help businesses with technology. So he created one as CEO and chief strategist for Eclipse Telecom. The Eclipse Way is an approach to tech sourcing that's client-centric, collaborative, and transparent. 13 years later, Dave's forthrightness has not only won over customers, but also earned him kudos as a top technology advisor and industry influencer. We will chat with Dave about his CEO journey, including a cross-country road trip. That's up next on the Working CEO podcast. Stay tuned. Hello, friends. I'm your co-host, Susanna Song, VP of Marketing at Highwire Networks. And I'm here with the working CEO himself, Mark Porter, CEO of Highwire Networks. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Susanna.
Well, we're back at it again, and looks like we've got an interesting guest who is a little bit nomadic, right? So, Dave, welcome to the podcast, first off. And what's with this cross-country little hobby you have?
That's probably its own multi-episode podcast. I'll give you the very abridged version of, it's interesting in terms of, introing me as an influencer, because I don't necessarily see myself as one, but I do have a voice in the industry and I try to use it to be authentic and was going through some stuff in life, like many people post-pandemic, and was having some struggles with the woman I've been with for 20 years, and in an effort to create space, and then also this idea, and there was a whole series of pieces. There was that with Mara. I was sitting in an office in the West Loop of Chicago for years by myself, looking at the door, waiting for people to come back into 5,000 square feet. It's great because I got to have all of the coffee in the water cooler, but no one to talk to at the water cooler. So I was like, what are you doing? I had actually admonished an enterprise client about, you have to stop being so stubborn about making your IT people work in the office. That's why you're losing people. And I'm like looking around this empty office. So called the landlord, closed the office, bought a van and took off and spent most of 2022 driving all around the country, seeing clients, visiting friends, making new ones, and doing a heck of a lot of work on myself. And what was interesting about all that, being a sort of an industry influencer and having, thousands of connections on LinkedIn, with my clients, with my partners, et cetera, I wrote an article about it. And I said, here's what's going on with me. And here's what I'm doing, and here's why. And it is the most, by a lot, engaged with piece I've ever written on LinkedIn. And the amount of strangers who've come up to me at events, industry events. I've had customers find me saying, I want to talk to you because I'm having all sorts of challenges in my personal situation because of the demands of work. So It was this wild, Pandora's box I opened, and it's been a gift. If you're fortunate enough to be able to drive around and live in a van, probably not for everybody, but it sort of hit for me this year. And I here I sit back in my condo in Chicago at the moment, but the van is
here
part
today,
of my existence at this
it's
point.
beautiful. I've got residences in Florida that I never get to in the winter because they're income properties, and as I look out the window on days like today, I wonder why, because life is real short. So what was your favorite place? What was the favorite place you found along your way, Dave?
That's the old, pick a favorite child question for me at this point.
My youngest will tell you our oldest is the favorite child.
and probably vice versa. And for me, there's just a lot of spiritual moments in nature because nature does that for us. Did spend time in the deserts and on tops of mountains and by the ocean and truly in a van down by the river. That happened, and those are spiritual moments. But bunch of epiphanies I had along the way about business, like a ton. And one of them is going to sound super easy and intuitive, but we all lose focus of it all the time. it's the people, damn it. Like it's the people, the special moments of like starting the trip, like going to see my father in Florida and spending time with him. Like I still have him and I'm grateful for that. Customers saying, come stay at my house. I want you to have dinner with my family. Like business partners I've worked with forever, opening their homes to me or going out of their way to like, have me be part of the journey and vice versa. And that was the thing. And I'm like, duh, it's the people. Yeah, we sell technology, we solve problems, we work with big companies or small, we build teams. None of it matters without the people. And it comes at a time in our space, in this industry that I work in and have for a long time, where all of this money's coming in. And one thing I know about money or believe about money is that it can cloud judgment and put a lot of fog over everything. And it's possible that we might be forgetting about things like our team, our employees, our customers, with the fog of money clouding the space right now. So like sounds so intuitive, like, duh, it's about the people. Like we all think that. Are we all living it is my question. And I'm like double, triple, quadrupling down on that idea heading into 2023. It's people buy from people. I have a 11-ish person company with people spread all around. And I say all the time, like, are we smarter? I don't know. Are we better? Do we execute better? Like I once gave a talk at an industry event, a room full of my peers. And I said, everybody uses this as a differentiator. We care the most. Raise your hand if you don't care about your customers. And no hands went up. And I'm like, now that would be a differentiator. Like we don't really care about you, but we're just super good at what we do. That's a differentiator, but everybody cares. But like, how are we delivering care? How are we making people feel valued? How are we like that? Susanna, you talked about the Eclipse way. Thank you for reading the website. Cause it's in everything we say and do. Like, do people experience us in the way we deliver this and go, this is unique and it makes me feel awesome to be working with these guys? Like that's the thing for me. And I don't know why it took me driving 20,000 miles around the United States to figure that out, but here we are.
Did you make a habit? It's one of the things, and honestly, COVID kind of took it away from me. I was getting very good at making a habit of getting away. It's hard when you're married with kids and all that stuff, but making a habit of getting away about every 90 days. And I would go, we've got a house down in the Florida Keys, and that was sort of my sacred space, if you will, to, go down there a lot of times with clients and a lot of times with families. But I would always try to take a day. I would try to work it out where it'd be a customer trip and I could take a day to maybe just work around the house or walk around, have some time to walk around the island. And traveling during COVID obviously made that challenging and those pieces. But before you did this, did you have any sort of habits like that, or were you kind of just stuck in your work grind?
The travel thing, yes, because it's one of those things for me personally that fuels my soul on a deep level. And anybody who knows me or is watching 3 minutes of this, I'm a pretty high energy, dude who may be a touch of an extrovert. So it's like, I always sort of chuckle when people say I'm going on vacation to recharge. I'm like, I'm going to let some of the juice out of the battery because like living at this frenetic pace is a lot. And the cool part for me is I have, a partner of 20 years who is a very international person. We go to Morocco. I'm going in a couple of days to Morocco and also the Netherlands where my daughter lives. Because and this is a word of caution to anyone who has younger children. I have an older daughter, and we encouraged her, like, be a citizen of the world, like study abroad in college. And then she meets this Dutchman who she later ends up with. And so she's living in the Netherlands, married to a Dutchman now. And so I have a convenient excuse to Europe, but I'm also sad that my daughter is living.
Got her to move that far away.
But it gives me a hell of an excuse to get on a plane a couple of times a year and go spend time with them. And it also gives me this impetus to, it's something I pre-COVID was really lousy at, unplug and get committed and zeroed in on my family time, on my personal time, because it's important. And those of us who are entrepreneurial, and this is like the note of caution on anyone starting or long-term running a business, we get tunnel vision and we get excited and we love the idea and the chase and the new idea and building, and we can lose sight of what really matters. And so I don't want to be that guy checking my phone 100 times when I'm with my daughter, who I get to spend, maybe a few days a year in the presence of. And so that's a habit I've been developing for a while. But post-COVID, there's this. I'm not taking a business trip ever again where I don't make a day to go see somebody I care about or love. I love everybody, but I have friends and people I love all over the country, or do something enriching for myself. Like a lot of us, I spent an entire life like getting up at 4:00, going to O'Hare, flying to Dallas, having 4 meetings and flying back that night. It's insanity. What the hell were we doing? I'm not doing
it. But I did it for the right reason. I did it because somebody gave me a heads up that I had forgotten that the next day was the office potluck, and it was very important to that person for me to show up. I didn't realize, I never even thought about it in that way, but she made it very clear that she really, I hadn't been around the office much, and she would, really thought it would be important. And they wanted smoked meats, so they knew that I was always also good for that. So. But,
well, listen, every party's better with smoked meats.
Yeah, that's what it's not a party till you've got the meat sweats, but that's a very important lesson, Dave. I mean, that was actually, that literally was last Wednesday was, be on the 5 a.m. flight down to Miami and back on a 4:00 flight. And, fortunately made it to the grocery store about 5 minutes before they closed to get the aforementioned smoked meats. And got a really dirty look from the guy who was about to lock the door as I walked in and put my hand on it. And I said, I will be out of here before 9:00. I promise you. So just point me to the meat section and I'm out. But so you talk about the sort of the beginning of your journey, and we talked a little bit about the concept of, nobody wants to just suck less, but unfortunately, sometimes that's really where the bar is in a lot of service businesses and service industries. You also talked about something I want to kind of circle back on in a second around the customer. I do think people forget about the customer. I know it's easy to forget about the customer when you're in a multi-tiering scenario, which is how we always work. We work with partners, and sometimes you get really lost in the commercials of the deal, right? You get terms and conditions and contracts and penalties. And I was alliterating for somebody why the contract was actually keeping us all from accomplishing what we wanted. We all wanted the same thing, but because of language in the contract, I couldn't say what they wanted us to say, right? We couldn't commit to something that we thought we could do, because if we didn't hit it, we'd be penalized. We committed to something that we knew for certain we could do and said we could do better than that, but I can't commit to it. And ultimately it created a lot of friction because of bad commercials. But and the customer lost in the shuffle is that the customer is actually delighted with what's going on. So why are we trying to screw with it? Right. That's like we could go faster, but is it going to be better or is it going to be worse? So a lot of variables in that. So what when you decided to launch this journey to go out on your own, this is one of the things that kind of the theme of the podcast is how do you what advice, and you've already offered some, what advice do you give people? What prompted you to say, I'm going to do this on my own? I think I can do this better. I think I can create something useful. What was it that made you take that leap?
There's a bunch of things, and I love entrepreneurs, by the way. That's why I love this space. There's so many great entrepreneurs running so many different kinds of businesses, even if they look similar on the surface. And in Chicago here, it's such a big city that I've gotten involved in entrepreneurial circles writ large, like consumer products and other things. So I've met all of these amazing people, and there's this common thread of they believe they can create something from nothing, And I've always called it the entrepreneur's pathological optimism. like you believe against all odds that you can do this, and boy, do we have crazy survival. You have to believe that you're able to manifest this. Otherwise, you stay in your safe corporate job and move on with your life. And so, I was working in corporate America for one of the big guys. I would watch at this time of year, like this heartless, soulless, like, oh, I guess it's December, better lay off or fire 10,000 people. And it was that sort of soullessness that was getting to me, while less and less focus was on the customer. I'm going to get a lot of arguments from the Friedman libertarian crowd, but the term shareholder value, it can be so poisonous. Like, because sometimes like increasing shareholder value by 2 cents in a huge company means putting 10,000 people out of work. And so I was just like, I think I can do this better with like a small band of committed pirates who like share a value system with me than a company with 150,000 people working in it. I'm pretty sure I can, because and it was kind of funny on day one. Like, someone asked me very recently, like, what was the business plan on day one? Because you've become very successful over 13 years of doing this. And I was like, it's still the same business plan. Somewhere is like still the cocktail napkin it's written on. Thing number one, I think I know what I'm doing, and I have a feeling I'm pretty good at this. And if I surround myself with other people who are pretty good at this, who care about the customer, we're going to do great. Thing number two, don't be an asshole. That's the whole business plan. That was the whole thing. That's still the whole thing. I think I succeed on most fronts, most days, but not always all the time. And those are the learning moments. I've got all of these maxims at the company. Like, the team gives me a hard time. Like, there's a string in my back you can pull for, Davisms. One of them is, you are free to make mistakes. You are not free to repeat them. Please go find glorious new mistakes for all of us to learn from. And I think when you look at big companies, they just keep making the same mistakes. And then they say things like, boy, you want to hear the phrase that'll absolutely send me into like a psychosis? It is what it is. Right. Like, you ever look at a customer and tell them it is what it is? I wouldn't sleep for a month if I ever said that to a customer. It's not what it is. Nope. We screwed up. We're going to do better next time. That's what we say. We're accountable. So all of that bundling together at this moment in time, when like big corporate telco was just making it harder and harder and harder to do business with them. And then here were those of us who were like, hey, we used to be insiders. We know what to do, and we know how to get things done. And my bet 13 years ago, when the channel was very small business focused, I was like, I think this model will play up market. And that's where we went and crafted our path, which set us so far apart from the rest of the space. Because it's what I knew. I was working with big global customers. I was working with the Fortune 500. And so those of us who had that training, at the big carriers came out and said, come with me. And a couple of customers took risk early on, took some chances, and the rest is history. Survivor's bias at its finest. I'm sitting here because a lot of lucky breaks, a lot of stubbornness, the pathological optimism that I can keep going even when it seemed really hard, and like failure wasn't an option. It's all trite, but it's also the truth. Like, it's how and until the industry of technology, cloud, telecom, data centers, whatever the heck you want to call what I do, gets more customer focused, we're just going to keep winning and winning and winning, because that's all we care about. It's our obsession, and it's what keeps us going.
Well, that's a lot. I talk about it as the will and the ability to figure things out, right? Like, what I think a lot of people have, especially as the organization grows, a lot of people tend to think that everything. And as I've talked about with a friend of mine who you kind of remind me a lot of, this guy, Jeff. Jeff was our very first guest, and we have lots of interesting conversations. But he reminds me all the time, you don't have to know everything, and you don't have to feel like you do, right? When you do, it's almost it's a pressure I used to be a police officer. I've been in life and death situations. I know what that's like. But when you're in this work life where you constantly feel like you have to know everything for everyone, which I think a lot of us fall into that trap, especially early in the journey. It never goes away. That if you get stuck feeling that it's not a fleeting thing, it's something that becomes almost an everyday, and then you get these sort of there's two things that there's some bad stuff that can really befall you. I've seen where you start feeling like well, it must be right because I think it too, right? So that's a whole other trap, and I've been guilty of that plenty. It's interesting. So when you look at these things, you look at what got you started. What do you tell somebody when they're starting out? I mean, what would you give somebody who's looking at this and saying, I'm really good at this, I'm really passionate about this, I've got bills to pay. What am I in for, and what would you do?
There's a ton to unpack there. First and foremost, and you said it really well. You start taking all of these burdens internal as the founder figure, the leader figure, and it can really start to weigh on you because you start feeling all of this responsibility to be right all the time, to have all the answers. And until you get the courage to just admit you're good in some areas and really weak in others, start filling in gaps with other humans. Hopefully you have the money to do that. You're going to start making things harder for everybody and yourself at some point, because I'm good at what I'm good at. I'm not good at everything. In the early days of starting a company, you have to learn to be a little bit good at everything. In the early days, here, I'll give you one. You know who's a really terrible telecom project manager? This guy. But I had to do it because that's what was required at the time. But as soon as I was able to put somebody into a chair that can do it better than me and let them grow and thrive. So, start thinking about, I talk about this all the time, even if it's just you or you and a partner or you and two partners, sit down and have a conversation. What does this organization look like when people work at it? What's our culture? Who gets things done? What am I weak at? Do an honest self-assessment. Like, I know I've got to do everything for now. What's the first 5 things I offshore to either an outsourced partner or an internal resource? Like, start thinking about that stuff. I'm super fortunate from where I'm sitting. I don't know how it happened. Like, I used to be like cool and exciting in this industry. Now I'm like one of those old sage dudes. Like, people are asking for advice and I hate it. But I look in the mirror and I'm old and I don't know when the hell it happened, but it did. And so now I get to do a lot of like advising of people who are doing the exact thing you're talking about. They're starting, they're coming in. I've done a lot of mentorship. I continue to actively mentor people who are in those early stages. Because as I like to say, Mark, if you want to sit with me for an hour and be like, tell me what not to do, I'm like, I have this like phone book size thing of mistakes not to make.
Yeah. And then I can save you a lot of time and headache.
Yeah. And by the way, they're the same mistakes everybody else makes. And they're the same, like, we all make the same mistakes because we all think similarly. And then I have like, here's 5 things you probably want to consider doing. And the list of 5 is valuable because they're like value system things. Like, build your culture before you have one is a value system thing for me. But the mistakes to avoid, like, if I can get in my hot tub time machine and go back and be like, no, don't do that. It's going to cost you $100,000, Dave. But those are like those painful lessons you have to learn as an entrepreneur. And
etched on your soul.
Yeah. and they do, because you're just like, God, I could have done something more meaningful. I could have moved the needle. And I guess the other, tying that all the way back around, the big piece of advice is be willing to make mistakes. Don't beat yourself up too much, but learn from them, because just repeating mistakes can be fatal, especially in those early days when you're toddler phase, you're learning to walk, you don't have support. The other thing, get outside, like, build a peer group as soon as you can. Even if you're a solo practitioner, you're a CEO, go find others. I love my team. We're close. We're tight knit. We really finish each other's sentences. But there are things that they're not going to understand because they've never been in this taking the risks chair. They've come into a healthy organization and they've helped it grow. what I have is a network of other CEO and founder types all around the country, and we talk and we share ideas and we just vent to each other in a way you can't do with your team sometimes. That's super healthy. Start doing that on day one. And it doesn't even have to be in the industry you're in. Like if you know people who are founder figures who started anything, it is truly lonely at the top. It can be. Don't let yourself be lonely. Make sure you're finding your little tribe of people who sort of get what you're going through. Get the like Mark. If I said to you, "Hey, there were probably times in the early days where your family was super pumped about how much time you were working," right? Like we've all been through that. And the sort of person who's like, "Yeah, I work a lot too. I put in 50 hours." And it's like, no, it was all consuming for the first 3 years.
Like I haven't seen my family in 6 months.
Yeah. And your family's like, hey, look, there's the life going on over here that you're missing. And so we've all been through some of that angst. And I think just having that network, the thing you're doing here is amazing because, again, I try to be a vessel for authenticity. Like, wasn't always prioritizing the things that like really matter because you're just like, I need to make this work. I have to make this work. I'm going to make this work. And sometimes other things around you break. So just make sure your network is strong. Make sure your support network is there. That's everything from family to peers to the people who have those like, encyclopedia of mistakes that you're going to make and I'm going to help you avoid.
I think that's a theme that's come through really even from, I think, Susanna, nearly every episode we've done and really from Jeff Wold on forward, and something that I think is a challenge because of the, if you look at the personality types that tend to be willing to risk it all and throw caution to the wind and do this, the ability, I say all the time, I do this because there are a group of people that I do not know why. I don't know what motivated them to help me, but they did. They helped me, one of them at a time when I was probably at my lowest in the business. 2008, the world was falling apart. There was no liquidity in the markets. We used to install Nortel Networks hardware. Nortel went bankrupt. They were one of 3 customer bankruptcies in 90 days. I didn't even know what that meant to me. I didn't know the bank could call your line of credit when the bank was in trouble. That happened on day 120 of that saga. So, at a time when I was at my lowest professionally, which at the time equated to being probably my lowest personally, because you get so lost in the persona of work. And I think honestly, for a lot of us, it is a persona at work, and hopefully it should be, right? Because there are times where you have to keep your guard up that you shouldn't be doing in a way with your friends and family, and when you want to be in your circle of trust, and hopefully you have that. I feel fortunate we have that as our in our team at work, especially in our leadership team. We have a lot of very direct conversations, as Susanna can attest to. But when you look at that willingness to admit that it's not okay or that you're not okay, and find somebody who can help you is so critical. And it doesn't matter to me if you're a CEO or the vice president of marketing who might have had 3 little ones under 3 at one point in time and not getting a whole lot of sleep, saying she was okay.
And weeping to her CEO.
And weeping. I will say that one of the best things that I learned as a CEO is that it's when somebody says they're okay, it's okay to reiterate to them that when I ask you if you're okay, no is an acceptable answer, because it does bring about some really amazing moments at work, as Susanna and I shared many years ago. So then we started with, why don't you go home and get some sleep, and then we'll have this conversation when you're not sleep deprived, right? And that's you got to look after your people like that too. And I probably wouldn't have been able to do that 15 years earlier. It wasn't. We
do a couple interesting cultural things at Eclipse that I think are super valuable there. One is, being the benefit provider, and make sure everybody knows all the time, like mental health care is part of healthcare, and it's, we have it, it's platinum coded. I use it. Anyone who wants to talk about it, I'll talk about, therapy, couples therapy, whatever kind of, help you need to go get it. And then the second thing we do, and it's one of my favorite cultural norms, and we're still small enough to maintain it. At a bigger size, you would have to do it in teams or pods. We do a 30-minute meeting in the middle of the week every week, and it's called Highs, Lows, and Appreciations. And it's like this EI-driven thing that's every person gets to talk about from their prior week, one high, one low, and then an appreciation. And it could be about anything. You could, and it could be personal, it could be professional, it could be glib if you don't really want to go anywhere deep that week, and say, my low is that the weather in Chicago sucks in December. Like, no kidding, you live in Chicago, Dave, right? Like, but if that's the thing you want to express to the team, but what it gives you, what the magic of it is this ability to listen deeply and intently to your teammates that you work with day in and day out. And once in a while, somebody's going to throw something out, and then you can go back and follow up. Hey, you said you were having a tough time with this thing. Do you want to talk? Well, no, I don't. Okay, but if you do, I'm here. The power of that in an organization, and the sort of transparency to talk about this ideal of like the CEO as trope, right? The Jack Welch, the conquering heroes, the Gordon Geckos. It's all bullshit. We're all flawed. We're all holding it together on our worst days by a thread, and so I talk about that. And I say to me,
randomly fire 30% of your workforce every year, out of 10%.
So I think it's so. I kind of love that we're living in this moment where the world is starting to have better conversations. Susanna, particularly for us men folk who are supposed to have it all together, it's okay not to be okay. It's more okay to go talk with people about it that you love and trust, or an outside expert whose job it is to help you work through it. Women are much, much better at those formal and informal networks. Like we put ourselves on islands as guys, and listen, like the math is bad. Like statistically, we die like 7 years sooner because we're like choking everything down, and women are like, helping each other. And so I want to get it to a point, as I like to say, where it's like okay to cry in a business meeting because we're having a moment. Like I've actually had that happen in the last year.
Suzanne has actually seen that. I've had some serious issues with my son's health, so she's actually seen anytime somebody says, "How's he doing?"
And I think it's awesome because it's human, man, and it's like where we need to be taking business. That you said something interesting. Like there are certainly things like I have to keep a little bit close because it's just the nature of like having access to all of the information,
right?
But ultimately, if you got off of this call and you called a family member, a friend, a coworker, a customer, and a vendor partner, you would get 5 explanations of who Dave Dyson is that sound a lot alike, because I can't like be switching masks all the time because I'm just not capable of it. So I'm like, at a certain point, I was sort of like, hey, I'll just be this, and either people will like it or be repulsed by it. And it's funny, like during the pandemic, this is like the first one of these I've done for a while, like the video thing. I was trying to keep my like public speaking saw sharp, right? And so we get on these things, and by the way, virtual conferences were horrific. Let's never do them again. Let's never discuss them again.
I hate them.
But I was like participating as a speaker in these things, and they'd always be like, so get on this panel discussion and say something interesting. And so me, with this attention span, would be getting bored by the second one. It was like, my interesting fact was, I'm Dave Dyson. I work at Eclipse in Chicago. I believe, communication is the most important thing people do, and the most important thing businesses do. And an interesting fact about me is 93% of the people in this industry like me. And then I would skate past it. And I just kept saying 93%, right? And then finally, like the third time I did it, someone said like, hey, I have a question. Where did you get the 93% figure? And I'm like, statistics, lies, damn lies, and statistics. And I just assume it's around 93% because I can't win them all.
Yeah. I think you said something's real, but we use a system. It comes up a lot, but it's called the EOS. But our team meetings start with the personal best and the business best.
Yeah.
And I didn't necessarily understand the value of it at first. But when you just look at habits and trends over longer periods of time, it's just a positive habit and a positive thing to do. And the engagement that it does create is different, because especially my team's all over the country, all over the world, in fact, at this point. And some of them, I don't, it's a goal, but I used to know every employee in the company. I still write birthday greetings for everyone that is, if it makes it to my calendar and I get a notice that it's their birthday, I go stalk them online and try to figure it out, because unfortunately with the 350, 360 folks, I always feel like I'm the last to know everything now, and they tell me that's how it's supposed to be, but it feels weird. But losing that personal touch is hard when you get that level of engagement, at least in the teams that you're intimate with week over week. It makes it so much easier to have those high trust conversations that you inevitably have to have at some point when somebody's not getting done what needs to happen, or when you don't understand why something's happening, and especially when you can't be as on top of all the details anymore, to be able to sit down and say, I'm not sure I understand what's shaking out here or who's accountable for it. I need to understand what's happening, why it happened, how it's not going to happen again. And I don't really give a shit whose fault it is. And that becomes that's a challenging part for people newer to the organization to maybe get their head around. I truly don't care who did what, as long as it's not going to happen again. And as long as we understand, is it a systemic issue? Was it human error? Because I'll be the first one to tell a customer, if it's human error, once we've evaluated everything and looked at it 100 different ways, and they say, well, how are you going to keep it from happening again? I can't promise you it's not going to happen again. Human errors happen. We traffic in human beings in our business. We're delivering service with people. There's going to be errors every day, lots of them, some big, some small, and you can get away with a lot of little ones if you do most of the things right and all those things, but they're human. So that's going to happen. You can't get too excited about it. You can't get too freaked out. But when you have to have those conversations and have somebody really, truly believe that if they give you an honest assessment of their mistake, which is hard to do, they have to believe and know that you're not going to kill them over it. I mean, that's if you start messing with somebody's job and their income and their livelihood, behind every one of those people is a family, right? And that paycheck means something typically to those families. And I would say employing people is, I always say this because it's the right thing to say. Can't say I've always lived up to it. It's the second most important thing to providing for my own family. And my wife would tell you the reason that's not always true is I often put them ahead of my own family in the early days, especially the paycheck. When you're starting out, you better be prepared for that part. It doesn't come every Friday in the early stages of the business.
No, doesn't the early
or every month.
Doesn't come every quarter. Yeah. It's an interesting thing. And I'm going to juxtapose, like, not necessarily size of companies, but style of companies culturally, like yours and mine, where people are free to make mistakes. I had hired somebody from a big telco carrier years ago, and something got screwed up. And we went to a meeting with the customer, and I walked in and I said, this is entirely my fault. It's my company's fault. It's my fault. We screwed up. Here's what we're going to do to make it right. Here's how it's going to go the next time. And ultimately, customer just went, okay, cool. And we're leaving. And that person who'd come from big telco goes, it wasn't our fault. I said, I know. And he said, but it was totally the other guy's fault. I know. And it was actually the customer, his guy's fault too. And I said, I know. And I said, nobody cares whose fault it is. They just want somebody to say, the blame isn't the thing. The problem is the thing. Let's solve it. And ultimately, if you go now to the other side of the ledger of like the fear-based culture, the first thing everybody's looking to do is figure out who to point the finger at. Yeah. And it becomes this like horrific game of spin the bottle. Who does it? Oh, it was Susanna's fault this time. Like
always her fault.
So yeah, it's always marketing's fault. That's what every CEO says, by the way. But no, I ultimately think you have to make a decision of who you are as an organization. Are you an accountability or a blame culture? It sounds easy on paper, but blame is very human nature, because it's like, it wasn't me, it was her. It wasn't me, it was circumstances beyond my control. It wasn't me, it was the markets. It was macroeconomics.
The easy grab is that, and I think it's human nature, is that the easy grab is, well, I couldn't control this, or this thing happened, and therefore, and all those things. I share a quick, one of my customers actually did this. We were working with a large retailer, and they were difficult at best, and their team was responsible for all the engineering of the SD-WAN gear that was going in, and SD-WAN has lots of potential for screw ups as you're deploying it. One policy going bad could ruin the whole thing. But the customer was unhappy. Our business partner who had hired us to do this was unhappy. Everybody, we were very unhappy. Everybody was unhappy. Everybody's working long nights and doing this stuff. And the sniping began. It's always those sales and marketing people blaming everybody else. People looking for, to shift blame. And what the vice president of the organization, of the professional services organization, did, I've never before seen it, and I've not seen it since, other than we use it all the time. I stole it from him because it was one of the greatest tools. When it was breaking down, he asked us all to come to a meeting in an hour, prepared to discuss 3 things without looking at any other part of this system, looking at your own piece of this, your own scope. Bring 3 things that you need to do better, or corrective actions, things that are going wrong, even if you don't know what the fix is. Identify 3 problems your team is having. I identified about 12 of ours, but collectively we were able to then fix them. It was a completely different dynamic when you brought your own sins to the table. Mm-hmm. And I've told all of our younger service delivery people, when these things happen and a customer will call, and if they've called me directly, it's usually not great. There's a lot of heat on it or whatever. But even if we've done nothing wrong, if you think we've done nothing wrong, if you did everything you would do over again, find something, because it's a much easier conversation if we start with, I really would like this to have gone better. And even if the answer is, we should have said no. Yeah. You asked for something that was a stretch, and in our desire to please you, I was thinking about this long and hard today about a situation that's going on. And our biggest stretch was that we didn't say no early on. And it's cost us dearly. It's a contract that's underwater. And because we didn't say no early on, we sort of led to a death by 1,000 cuts. And when we had the opportunity a month into it to stand up and say, we did a bad job scoping this, or we did a bad job holding you to scope, one or the other is true, maybe both, right? If you start that conversation in that light, as opposed to saying, this is bullshit, you hoodwinked me, which also might be the case, but which one's going to get the right response, right? Which one's going to bring about a resolution to the problem, maybe save you a lot of money, and certainly would have saved us a year. And frankly, I don't so much care about the money. I care about the fact that we lost a year, and that everybody involved in that has lived in a bad contract, and that has created toxicity in their day-to-day work life. And that can't be all that pleasant. So,
yeah, why I like that strategy overall, and why I like literally been taking notes and writing it down here is that it falls in the category, the terminology I use is like the holster your weapons meeting. Like, okay, we're all pissed at each other, so instead let's just talk about what we personally did wrong, and nobody. I don't want to say nobody because people are people, but nobody's going to be like, I did nothing wrong. Everybody else is screwing up. Everyone's going to be accountable to like at least something they could have improved on, even if you use that language of improvement versus what are you screwing up. And I think that's a super healthy way to get everybody to stand down from, like pointing the weapons at each other. And I think that's half the battle half the time. When you talk to me, you're always going to hear me talk about beliefs. And one of my beliefs is there are very few problems in the world that can't be solved with better communication. Easier said than done, of course, but communication's the thing, like how we get our points across, how we listen more than how we're heard. All of these things can resolve, business problems, personal problems, geopolitical conflict, you name it. If we all just start communicating a little better with more empathy and better listening and more kindness and stop trying to just be right all the time and start getting other people's perspective. I want to. That's Valhalla, but I'd like to live in that place if I can get there.
Yeah, that would be ideal. So the one question, Dave, that we ask everybody, it's the only question. As we said before, this kind of ramble and wander wherever they go, because it's really important. You never know what somebody's going to take away from this that might help them, or maybe help them to reach out because they're having issues or questions or thoughts or whatever, right? The one question we ask everybody is, what would you tell, well, in your case, 13 year ago, Dave, who's just starting out, what would you tell that younger version of yourself that you wouldn't even have known to think about when you started this journey?
Love the question. Go back and give them the lottery numbers and never start a company, I guess is the good answer. But
it depends on what time it is, right?
No, honestly, it's something you touched on a little bit earlier about the sort of head down nature of entrepreneurship. I talk about this a lot. When I was a younger guy, whether it be a young sales guy in telecom or a younger entrepreneur, because I wasn't all that young when I started. It's this one simple fact, like, because I like a lot of men and women who are this way, we go nose down and we go forward. And it took me a long, long time to realize, pick your head up and you will see nothing but hands above you waiting to pull you up. People are rude, like, in a way I can't even possibly begin to explain. Like, if you're out in the world listening to this and thinking about starting a business, people are there to support you that you didn't even expect or suspect. There are people waiting and wanting to help, and they're rooting for you. And it's not who you think it is, by the way. It's going to surprise the hell out of you when it happens. So like, pick your head up, look for the help, ask for the help, have the crazed arrogance to be like, I can create something from nothing, mixed with the humility to say, and I can't do it alone. And it's going to go awesome. Like, that's what I want to tell 13 year ago, Dave. Like, dude, just start asking for help on day one. You think you know things, you don't really know anything. Passion helps, but it's not enough. Experience, lived experience, shared experience from others will it'll just get you around a lot of the landmines and go ask for help. So that's it. I know that's sort of on theme for me today, but yeah, that the younger, less wiser version of me could have probably stood to hear something similar to that.
It's good advice, and a lot of our guests have repeated something similar. It's which just validates how true it is, and I don't think you can. I don't think you can hear it enough, because that's the concept of, it goes back to always having to know the answer, right? We don't have all the answers. It's complicated. Especially today, just the mechanics of compliance of a business today. a private business, public business, and we're now in that whole world, just trying to keep up with the basics of keeping the business itself as an entity alive and legal and all those stuff. It's gotten so complicated. I get calls all the time. Where do I begin? Right?
Yeah.
Like where do I'm like, oof, that's it's just, there's a whole host of stuff. It's like, because everybody knows I want to do something. I want to do this, like getting incorporated, I always say get really good accounting help. If you're not good at that, you need to have really good accounting help and get good systems from the beginning, because you can't afford not to. But that always comes back to being able to identify resources that could help you in the human realm. I think, and that's why we're doing this.
Humble yourself to know you don't have all the answers on day one, and life's just going to be easier. And I think we see what happens, when you get like these CEOs of big companies who believe they can do no wrong. Suddenly, everyone's just never saying no to them, and then things go catastrophically wrong because they've surrounded themselves with yes men and women. And some, I joke with my team, like, if a week goes by where everybody's head is doing this to me, I'm going to start doing things wrong on purpose to see if you guys are paying attention. I'm going to break stuff. Like, so, like,
a friend of mine said, he said, I don't get you. I said, what? We were working together for a while, and he's one of the smartest guys I know. He taught me so much. He doesn't think so, but he did. I tell him all the time. He still doesn't think so. He does amazing things. He's just an incredible operator. He said, I really don't get it. And I said, what is it that you don't get? He said, you're arguing with me stuff, and I'm starting to realize that you don't even believe it. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, you're arguing. I tell you something that I think, or I say, well, what about this? And you argue against it immediately. And I said, yeah. And he said, but you don't believe that. You're like, okay, fine, we'll do it. Like, you'll flip a switch and you'll say, fine. He's like, I don't get it. And I said, well, what do you think it is? He goes, I'm starting to think you're just testing me. I said, hell yeah, I'm testing you. I said, if you want to do it, that's fine. I might not know anything about it. If I argue about it with you, I want to understand if you're convicted, right? If you're convicted that this is the thing to do, then great. If you just go, if I start arguing and you're like, oh, well, screw it, I didn't mean to start a fight. Like, we're not doing it. I'm not going to follow you down. If you don't believe in it, why should I go blindly down the path with you? And he's like, that's all it's about. I said, yeah, like, what if you don't push and find out how much somebody believes in it, it might not even be a good idea. But if you believe in it really bad, if you believe in it, you're smarter than me. I'm going with you, right? Like, so that's the litmus test for me. If we're it doesn't have to be a great plan. Let's just go execute it violently and see what happens. And if it doesn't work, we'll adjust. That's it. So anyhow. Well, thank you very much, Dave. This has been great. How can people get in touch with you if they're interested in what your company does, or interested in a ride in your van, or
to read your article?
Anything like that?
Yeah.
To read your articles.
LinkedIn's a great place for professional connection. It's my sort of one social media channel that you'll find me on. Dave's Cybersecurity Paranoia about social media is a different podcast for another time. LinkedIn is great. LinkedIn.com /Dave Dyson, eclipse-telecom.com on the web. And yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. This is fun. And, obviously, Mark, as I warned at the outset, it's the sort of thing I can get into for hours. I love talking to big thinkers and fellow entrepreneurs. So, and Susanna, man, you're good at this. So, like you're wicked good at this. It's super polished and like.
It might be her years. It might be her years.
I was like, oh God, now I have to follow that. Like, look how good she is. So
I'm just Mark's sidekick, but thank you so much, Dave. I really appreciate you being. What?
He's so full of it.
Well, anyway, thank you so much, Dave. I appreciate your genuine voice. And I do think a lot of the lessons for entrepreneurs can also be lessons for life. So these were really great life lessons to look up, look out, and really care for people. It doesn't just have to be your customers or your coworkers, but in general, to be a little more aware and caring. So I appreciate that. And thank you to our listeners for joining us today on The Working CEO. Be sure to join us for our next episode of The Working CEO, when we will meet a CEO who helps entrepreneurs and accidental millionaires manage and grow their wealth. Until next time, I'm Susanna Song.
And I'm Mark Porter.
And this is The Working CEO. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe so you don't miss the next episode of The Working CEO. Also, don't forget to rate this show, share the episodes you like, and leave us a comment. Remember, whether your collar is blue or white, roll up your sleeves and get real. The Working CEO is made possible by Highwire Networks, a leading global provider of managed and professional services and managed cybersecurity services. We serve businesses in more than 180 countries. To learn more, visit highwirenetworks.com.